Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about vaccination and the COVID vaccine. We recently put out a survey on Target Solutions to everybody, and we have a lot of people undecided. We wanted to provide this live stream as a resource so everybody can get information and ask questions. Today we have special guests, Dr. Shepke, the State EMS Medical Director, and Dr. Yuli Cho, the Director of the Department of Health for Pinellas County. And Doc Jay is going to start out by giving us a COVID update.
All right, thanks, Jasmine. So it's been a bit since we did one of these, so I just wanted to quickly give folks an idea of where we're at. You all remember our peak over the summer, and we certainly came down from that, but we are now on our way back up. I'll share very quickly what our graph looks like today. You can see this was July over here, and here we are headed back up here. Our percent positivity is up. Our total numbers of cases are up. I'll share with you that our hospitalizations are up as well, and our ICUs are up likewise. We have roughly 200 people hospitalized in Pinellas today, and we have roughly 60 people in the ICU, with not quite half of them being on ventilators today. So that's where we stand right now. Obviously, with the holidays over the last week, there is some concern that we've had some increased exposures, and we may see some increased cases. The testing sites that are out there for the public have done more testing in the last week than they've, I think, ever done before in terms of volume of people coming in to get tested. And so that, I think, says something about what people in the community are feeling related to this. With that, I'll stop there. I'll introduce Dr. Ken Shepke. He is the State of Florida EMS Medical Director and a pretty smart guy when it comes to vaccines, immunology, and all that kind of stuff, as well as being an ER doc and an EMS doc. And so I'll ask Dr. Shepke to give us, from the state perspective, sort of where we sit right now.
Sure. Well, thanks, Angus. There's no question that we've seen more COVID recently. Back at the end of July, we saw a peak. We had over 10,000 hospitalizations then, and then things came down and calmed down, and we were hovering right around the 2,000 mark as far as statewide hospitalizations. That's a little over 4,000 now. So that's more than doubling from where we were. But there is some light at the end of the tunnel here. It does look like just lately we may be flattening out that curve. We were worried that we might start getting into an exponential rise like some of the other states in the country have seen. But for us, it looks like we're sort of plateauing around the 4,000 mark, which is good news. Hopefully that's not just some statistical fluke due to the holiday period and that this is accurate data, but we'll be watching it closely. The statewide positivity rate has been ranging between 6 and 9%. We do want to remain below that 10% margin, and we are. Today it was actually 8.71%. And one of the things we track is the transmission rate. The transmission rate, when it's above 1, means that the pandemic is expanding. When it's below 1, it means contracting. We're getting fewer and fewer cases. And when it's at 1, you're flat. And it looks like it's right about at 1 as of today. Now, hopefully that's going to hold. That is a number that can change over time. And hopefully it actually dip below 1.0. One of the things that we actually do track that you can look at is are people congregating, looking at cell phone. It's not identifiable data, but you can see when there's a lot of cell phones congregating together. And lately, it looks like there has not been a lot of congregation. So despite the holidays, it does look like a lot of people did heed the warnings, and we are hopeful, although only time will tell, we're hopeful that we'll see a decrease in the transmission rate and a slowing down of hospitalizations and death rates. We are knocking right on the door of the 1 million confirmed COVID positive cases in the state, and we'll probably pass that today or tomorrow. And that's about where we are right now. We've had over 18,000 people have died, unfortunately, in our state. And we had averaging about 74 deaths per day in the last 7 days. Well, let's hope that folks will continue to heed the public health warnings and protect themselves, wear masks, social distance, try to use outdoor air whenever possible, as opposed to indoor air, and we can get this under control.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Shepke. I appreciate that update on the state level. I'm sure everybody's seen updates in the news on the national level as well. And I would say, thankfully, we're not quite as bad as some other places in the country right now, but certainly we can't let our guard down as we go into the next phase of this pandemic. As you mentioned, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what we're here to discuss today. There are multiple vaccine candidates that are making their way through phase 3 studies. There's well over 100 worldwide, I believe, vaccine candidates that are being studied, but there's a few that we're going to focus on today that seem to be really getting close to being ready. And in fact, have already submitted applications to the FDA for EUAs, or emergency use authorizations, for 2 of them. So we will ask, first of all, Dr. Shepke to go ahead and give us sort of a primer on the vaccines and how they work and the different kinds that people have heard about in the news, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I'll be happy to. I'm just going to share a screen here. Hopefully you can see that. If you can't, you let me know. So I'm going to cover the 5 vaccines that are in the pipeline for the United States, and just a little background, because I think it's common, and I think you may have said, I may have heard that maybe your folks in Pinellas County are still trying to decide whether they want to take the vaccine. And I think we're seeing that a lot in even among healthcare workers, wondering whether they should get this vaccine that's coming up or not. So just a quick background on vaccine technology. Our first vaccine was 1796, was when Edward Jenner discovered that vaccinating folks with cowpox could protect you against smallpox. In fact, that's where the term vaccination came from, because the virus that causes cowpox is vaccinia, and that's where the term came from. And over the years, we've had a number of different ways we can vaccinate people. You can use a virus that you've killed, and that's how we make the hepatitis A vaccine. You can use an alive virus that we have made weaker. That's what we do with the measles vaccine. You can use genetic manipulation of a benign virus, and that's what AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are doing with their COVID vaccine candidates. You can use a piece of a virus and not actually a whole virus. That's what Novavax is doing. They're using this purified spike protein. I'll talk about that. And then you can do this brilliant new technology. And when I say new, I don't mean it's like brand new, like they just did it this year. They've been working on this for the last 30 years or so, but really it's taken off in the last 10 to 15 years or so, and especially the last 5 years. And that's these messenger RNA, man-made virus-like lipid nanoparticles. These things are not a virus at all. And Pfizer and Moderna are the 2 that are making vaccine candidates in the United States. But before we get into the science behind that, let's talk about how did we get here so quickly? Because folks understandably are concerned, like, did we cut corners to get these vaccines? And should I be worried that we're cutting safety margins? And the answer is, no, we're not really cutting safety margin. It's simple medical advancement. So if you look at the smallpox vaccine, that was our first one, right? So thousands of years of human history, we finally got our first vaccine. And then it was hundreds of years until we got the next breakthrough. And then to get the measles virus to be weak enough that you can use that as a vaccine, that took a decade. The Human Genome Project, though, kind of explains how we were able to do this current vaccine so quickly. So the Human Genome Project, for those who remember, took $3 billion, over 200 labs in the United States, 18 other countries worldwide, and took 13 years to decode the human genome. Currently, we can do the same thing in 24 hours for $1,000. So this is a major, major medical advance. And when you look at the comparative size of the genetic database, humans, we have 6 billion bases in our genetic code. A fruit fly has 123 million bases. A bacteria like E. coli has only 5 million bases. But when you look at the SARS protein, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19, it's only 30,000 bases. It's literally not even a drop in the bucket when compared with the amount of genetic information in a human. So as you can imagine, you could figure out the entire genetic code of the virus literally the same day. It's very, very quick. So that takes us to these messenger RNA vaccines, which is this latest technology. And by the way, let me just point out that we will forever be able to make vaccines very, very quickly because of this medical breakthrough. So this is not a virus at all. This is a man-made lipid nanoparticle. And what they do, and that's basically a fancy word for a little ball of fat. And what they do is they take these little balls of fat and they insert this thing called messenger RNA into these little balls of fat. And what a messenger RNA, it's basically the genetic recipe to produce one particular protein. In this case, the protein we're looking for is the spike protein that's on the outside of the COVID-19 virus. So but you don't have to do that. You can do any protein you want. And that's what's very exciting about this technology, is you can use this for lots of stuff. I mean, not just infectious diseases. It's even being studied for cancer therapy, because when you get cancer, a lot of times those cancer cells will make a mutated protein. And if you can get the genetic code for the mutated protein, you can do the same thing, put it in one of these lipid nanoparticles, inject it, and then it teaches your body's immune system to attack any cell that has that mutated protein on it, in this case, cancer cells. In fact, they've done that for melanoma. So it's also it's ultra rapid technology. So it doesn't take thousands of years, hundreds of years, or even a decade. I mean, this is literally something that's really, really fast. In fact, it took 62 days to create the vaccine candidate. That's it. 62 days from uncovering the genetic code of the virus to injecting the first human with this vaccine candidate. So then, and that's simple, that's not cutting corners, that's simply how fast we can do it now. But then you wonder, all right, so that was 62 days right in the beginning of this. Why don't we have a vaccine yet? That's where all the safety data and all the studies come through. Because then what you need to do is you need to do a study and give half the folks the vaccine and the other half placebo. And obviously the placebo is not going to make you immune to this thing. And then you have to wait for that study population for enough of them to get infected. As they go about their lives, they're going to come in contact with the disease, and some of them are going to get infected. Now, normally that takes a long time because the disease isn't so prevalent. For example, Zika or even Ebola. It's not like the whole world was infected with that, just parts of it. But when you've got the entire world infected and you're having literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people get new infections every single day, you can imagine that your study population is exposed all the time. So that rapidly increases the number of folks in the placebo group that get the infection. And that way you can look, all right, of the folks that got infected, how many are in a placebo group, how many are in the vaccine group? And that tells you, hey, this thing works or it doesn't work. And that's why we were able to go through those studies so quickly. So now Pfizer and biotech is the first one that's going to come out. It's a messenger RNA vaccine. Problem with this is messenger RNA is an extremely fragile molecule. So, I mean, it'll break down right away, especially if you don't even put in one of those lipid particles. If you just injected the messenger RNA, it wouldn't even get in your cell. It would just be broken down by enzymes. So, but if you put this thing in a lipid nanoparticle and store it at negative 80 degrees centigrade. Now, this is not a normal freezer. This is an ultra cold freezer. Then you can store it up to 6 months. So that creates some logistical problems for us because not everybody has those type of freezers. But the good news is that you can't put it in a regular refrigerator for 5 days. So that's going to help us a little bit as we roll this thing out. We just want to make sure that you don't store it in a refrigerator long term. You don't want this thing to expire useless, right? That would be a tragedy. You can put it at room temperature. Once you bring it to room temperature, you got 6 hours. So once it's room temperature, you just got to give it. Now, their study had 44,000 folks in their study, diverse background, which is great. Zero safety concerns. It was 95% effective. I'm going to talk about that in a second because that's a big deal. And you got both antibody and T cell immunity. And the reason why that's important is because your immune system has lots of different branches to it, like the military does, right? So you can imagine your antibodies are like your ground troops. Those things attach to the spike protein. And if you cover up all the spike proteins, then the virus cannot attach to your cell because it uses the spike protein to attach to the receptors on your cell. So if you cover every one of their spike proteins, it's like you've taken away all its attachment points, and it makes the virus inert. That's called neutralizing antibodies. But you also want to have T cell immunity, and we found out that's important for any infection that invades the inside of the cell, and that's how the virus copies itself. It gets inside your cell and hijacks your cell's protein-making process to make copies of itself. Well, the T cells, very importantly, recognize infected cells and kills those infected cells, thus aborting the virus's ability to replicate itself. And the Pfizer vaccine was able to give us both antibodies and T cell, which is great. We may get 20, 30 million doses before the end of December, depending on how quickly the FDA is able to give us a thumbs up on it. It does have to be sent out very cold, so they're going to send it in these dry ice boxes. I'm going to move on to Moderna. It's also messenger RNA. Like Dr. Jameson said, they're also just applied for the emergency use authorization. This one's a little bit easier. You do have to freeze it, but you can use a regular freezer. It's not quite as cold, so that's going to help us with the distribution of it. It can also stay in the refrigerator a little bit longer, 7 days in this case. In fact, Moderna on their webinar did say that you could actually go up to 30 days. That's not official yet until the FDA gives thumbs up on that data, but hopefully we can store it up to 30 days in regular refrigerator. Also, once open, you only got 6 hours. Also, big study, diverse background, zero safety concerns, and 94% effective, and antibody and T cell immunity. And they maybe deliver a bunch of doses before the end of this year. And importantly, we'll be getting millions of doses every single month going forward. Now, the reason why I want to talk about the efficacy rate is because some of the best vaccines in history are in the upper 90s. You know, some of the best vaccines humans have ever had, like the measles vaccine. But a more typical vaccine, like the influenza vaccine, that's only like 40 on average. I mean, it ranges, but on average, 40% effective, 40. This is 94, 95%. I mean, literally in vaccine terminology, this is a grand slam to get something that's that effective. I'm not going to go about that. Let's go talk about the AstraZeneca vaccine. So this is using a different technology. It's a little bit older technology where they take a benign virus that's relatively harmless. In this case, it's a virus that causes a cold in chimpanzees. It's called an adenovirus. They genetically manipulate it so the virus cannot copy itself. And then they add the genetic code for the spike protein to it so that when it attaches to your cell, that genetic material gets into your cell and does the same thing the messenger RNA does, which makes the cell create the spike protein. Early results look good on this one too. Maybe not quite as effective as the first two, but also highly effective, and anywhere from the upper in the mid 60s to 90% based on some of the early data that they presented. They haven't finished all their studies yet, and they're probably not going to apply for emergency use authorization until sometime in early 2021. Johnson & Johnson is very similar, also using an adenovirus. The nice thing about this one is all the other, of the 5 vaccine candidates we've got in the pipeline in the United States, 4 of them are a 2-shot regimen, meaning you get 1 shot today and another shot approximately 3 or 4 weeks later. But the Johnson & Johnson one, they're trying to do it in a single shot. So that's nice if they're able to pull that off. Also, both of these showed antibody and T-cell immune response. Also won't be ready until 2021. Novavax is the last one I'm going to talk about. This one is not a virus. This one's just a piece of the virus. In this case, it's a purified spike protein. Now, normally when you use just purified proteins from a virus, it doesn't give you as robust an immune response. So you have to combine it with something called an adjuvant. So this one will be combined with adjuvant. That's basically something that ramps up your immune system. They're not quite as forward as the other 4 that I mentioned already. So we probably won't see phase 3 results until a little further into 2021. But this one and the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson are just regular refrigerators, so the storage will be a little bit easier on that. So that's it for the quick summary of the vaccine candidates, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Jameson.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Shepke. That was a lot of information super quick. So I'm glad we were recording it and people can watch it back if they missed any of that. But really good explanation of how these things work and what the differences are between them and where they are. I'd like to ask Dr. Cho at this point to chime in with any thoughts he has on the various vaccines and where we're at and his thoughts on them.
Good afternoon, everybody, and Dr. Shepke, very thorough job there going and giving a great overview of the vaccines out there. Just a few things to really add on to that. Keep in mind that some of the studies, it was through and those efficacies has been through an interim report that it really has not yet been published in medical journals. So some of that information is limited there. Also keep in mind that in terms of those studies, the primary endpoint was symptomatic COVID. So it prevented 95% of the symptomatic COVID. So there's that component where there may be asymptomatics, and we know that it can be spread through asymptomatic means. Some of the unanswered questions, and again, I think we have to wait for some of that information to get out there, includes the demographic information. Is it more effective for those older? I know some of the interim studies does show that even for the ages older than 55 and 65, that they may be effective. But again, until we are able to dig down to that data, it's hard to say for sure. And the other unknown, the question that I get sometimes is the longevity of the vaccine. Unfortunately, I don't think, and Dr. Shepke, I don't know if they've come up and have updated this since, but the longevity for the most part is unknown. We haven't had that kind of data. You need to, once it rolls out, then you sort of study it near a year from now or 2 years from now. But the thought is that if it acts like other common coronaviruses, the longevity of the vaccine could be 1 to 2 year plus, again, if it acts like other coronaviruses. So just touching on some of the vaccines that Dr. Shepke mentioned, and I'm going to dig into a little bit more of the side effects. For the Pfizer biotech vaccine, just reviewing some of the smaller phase 1, phase 2 studies, again, limited by the lack of that phase 3 study information out there. But some of the common side effects includes the fatigue, headache, fevers, pain at the site injection. I believe some of the studies from this one as well as Moderna does show that these common side effects may be more commonly seen with the second dose in the series. As you all know, that in terms of the vaccine, that depending on the vaccine, you could have different common side effects, right? Whereas a pertussis or Tdap shot and the shingles vaccine, you can express more side effects compared to, for example, the flu shot. What they believe, and just to be transparent, is that you'll have the side effects more on par with the shingles vaccine than the flu shot. So you may feel under the weather for 24 hours once you get the vaccines. In terms of the Moderna, similarly, in terms of the side effect profile, the phase 1/2 studies does show that it was short-lived side effects. And again, very similar to Pfizer, including fatigue, muscle pain, chills, and headache. Of note, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, and I know I've mentioned it on our last presentation here, it was actually, scratch that. That's about the AstraZeneca, but again, the side effects, like Pfizer, was more commonly seen with the second dose. So AstraZeneca, again, the same common sort of side effects there, and this is the vaccine that was paused due to concerns of the development of a neurologic condition called transverse myelitis, demyelinating disease, which can cause nerve damage, muscle weakness. They did not attribute it directly as an effect to the vaccine, but more to an underlying cause. And then looking at the decision-making process, and the common question that I get all the time is whether I take the vaccine, and people are going to watch me and see what kind of side effects if I grow another arm, for example. But now some of the concerns, and I think Dr. Shepke addressed it pretty well. Again, I think the technologies have gotten better, but vaccines do take up to a decade to develop in the past. And I think a lot of the things that sped it up does include the resources that were thrown at it through Operation Warp Speed. But at the same time, it does present some hesitancy from the general public. A Pew Research survey conducted in September does show that only 51% of people will be willing to get the vaccine. And I think a recent survey of the general population does show about 58%. So on par, 50-50. But that also bleeds into the healthcare workers as well. A survey was conducted by the American Nurses Association that found that 34% of people, of the nurses that took the survey, would get the vaccine, 36% would not, and 31% were unsure. And that does present a problem. Vaccines, I think, is going to be a huge component of ending this pandemic. And like all vaccines, you need a certain percentage of individuals to get the vaccine to develop that herd immunity. I think it depends on the different literature and information out there, but that herd immunity for COVID is thought to range anywhere from about 50 to 70%. So we'll probably need somewhere around that range in terms of vaccination. I know at a federal level, I believe the goal is about 80%, sort of a loftier goal. But again, a lot of resources went into this vaccine. That gives me a little bit of comfort in terms of dollars, the support by governments, by multiple pharmaceutical companies working in collaboration. And then some of the processes I'll be sort of conducting to assess whether I get the vaccines include looking at the phase 3 data myself, looking at those things that I've mentioned, looking at what some of those national experts says and how they interpret the data, such as Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Paul Offit. I definitely am curious to see what those folks and how they interpret the data. We're going to see, and then the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, is meeting right now. We're eagerly waiting to see what they come up with. And I think David was going to talk on that a little bit more. But they're the independent body working with the CDC, comprised of physicians and scientists, that really recommends and develops that vaccine schedule for all vaccines. So I'm curious to see how they interpret the data as well. And then ultimately, we have to see what the FDA, specifically what the emergency use authorization language says and what the indications will be. So with that, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cho. So I think all good points that have been brought up. I want to just touch on one or two things, which is that we have phase 1 and phase 2 data that have been published. We have phase 3 data that has been submitted to the FDA, at least for the 2 mRNA, that's the Pfizer and the Moderna. But those data have not been made public yet. And so that, I think, is part of the question that remains. We've heard about what's contained in the phase 3 data via press releases and via reports from the data safety monitoring boards of the studies, but we have not actually seen the data ourselves. And I'm a sort of a trust but verify kind of guy. And so I know for myself, everything I've read and seen so far looks positive and encouraging for me wanting to decide to get the vaccine. But I think I probably want to see a little bit more of that data in terms of the side effects. There's a couple of comments coming in already and questions. And so I'm going to start with the first question I see, which is, does the virus morphing affect effectiveness of the vaccines as it does with influenza? So influenza is a bit of a different animal than this because there's lots more subtypes, and we're really dealing with one subtype of coronavirus. There are others, some of which cause the common cold, and we see every year, but this is a particular subtype. As far as mutations in the virus, there have been lots of mutations, small ones though, and ones that don't really impact what's called the receptor binding domain of the spike protein. And that's the particular area of this protein. You've all seen the pictures of the virus on the news, and it has all these spikes on the outside of it. Well, those are supposed to represent these proteins that stick out and interact with a receptor on your cell, and that's how the virus attaches and infects the cell. Now, if that protein were to mutate at the area where it sort of clicks into the lock, then the key wouldn't fit anymore and the virus would be less effective. So these vaccines, it turns out, are actually targeting that specific protein. And because if the virus mutated that protein, it would lose its effectiveness, the vaccines, therefore, are going to be effective for any mutation that doesn't target that specific area. So, I think I've heard Dr. Shepke comment on this particular question as well. He might be able to say it a little bit more eloquently than I have. But really, because that's the protein that's targeted, I think is why that's not as much of a concern right now.
Yeah, you've got it exactly correct. So the receptor binding domain is the key. That's basically the key that goes into the lock. And if that key changes, then it can't attach to the cells. You're absolutely right. So it's a relatively resistant area to mutation because the virus itself will lose its ability to attach to the cell. And you're correct. Antibodies are being, we're trying to program the antibodies to get to that particular location. Dr. Cho, by the way, is absolutely right on the side effects and on the safety studies. Both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's studies were paused due to, by their data safety monitoring boards, because they had patients that developed symptoms that they wanted to make sure were not related to the vaccine. Neither of the 2 messenger RNA vaccines, neither Pfizer nor Moderna, had any of such pauses. But the side effects that Dr. Cho rightly points out, they're common with other vaccines, but I can see that as an operational issue for us, and we'll have to work through that, because right now many of us are screening for COVID symptoms for our workforce, and if all of us get vaccinated on the same day and all of us have a headache and achy and low-grade temperature for 24 hours, then there's going to be nobody that's going to be staffing our rescues or our hospitals. So we're going to have to come up with some good strategy to differentiate vaccine side effects and to stagger the workforce getting vaccinated. Typically, the symptoms get better with Tylenol and go away in 24 to 48 hours in most folks. And absolutely, it's the second shot that seems to bring this on. After your immune system's already learned this a little bit, you get that second booster shot and you really get a ramped up immune system. And it's your immune system that's giving you those symptoms. So the second shot's where we really have to be on the lookout for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that assessment. Question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
As the questions are rolling in, since we have a lot coming, I wanted to hit some of the top ones that I think could be answered pretty quickly. I've had, if you've had COVID, should you be considering getting the vaccine?
So the answer is yes. Right now, the recommendations are looking like anybody should get it, even if you've previously had COVID, even if you've previously tested positive for the antibodies. And they are not recommending an antibody screening test prior to administration of the vaccine. There is a caveat that if you're very short of vaccine, somebody who's recently been infected may not want to be the person at the front of the list, but that's a more resource allocation decision than a clinical decision.
How does the COVID vaccine interact with the flu vaccine, and how far apart should you get these vaccines?
Well, another good question. Dr. Shepke or Dr. Cho, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to do it? How about Dr. Cho?
I'm not. So they're not really concerned about the interactions between the flu shot and the COVID vaccine. I think what they're trying to prevent is if you from people getting it simultaneously, see if the side effects are due to the COVID vaccine versus an interaction or a adverse event as it pertains to the flu shot. I believe the majority of the vaccines, what they would like is a separation by 4 weeks, but I think some are 2 weeks. Dr. Shepke, I don't know if you have anything more up to date on that one.
No, you're exactly on target. The figures I've heard is that they would prefer 30 days between getting the flu vaccine and getting the COVID. And it's not that they interact badly. It's exactly that. It's for monitoring side effects and vaccine related. You want to be able to know which is causing issues. So they don't really want you to have both at the same time.
Yeah, in fact, it sounds like there's going to be an app for monitoring side effects for folks who get the vaccine. This is, there's been a couple folks in the comments who said they want to see what happens with other people first before they choose to get it. And I would say, that's a reasonable position to take. Some people don't want to be, feel like they're being experimented on. And I can certainly understand that. I would say, though, that we've been through phase 1 and phase 2. So we've watched for months and months for any kind of significant reactions. Most reactions to vaccines, including those severe ones that you worry about, tend to occur within the first month or two at the outside. And we will have phase 3 data on literally tens of thousands of people who received this, who have been observed for 2 months or more for their vaccine or for any side effects. So I believe that this is going to be one of the most closely watched vaccines in history in terms of side effects, to the point where you're going to have an app that checks in with you daily looking for any side effects after receiving the vaccine. I think it's called V-Safe is the name of the app, I believe. It's already out there or ready to go. And so this is going to be so incredibly closely monitored that I think we'll know if something starts to go sideways, and I think we'll know very quickly. And I would agree, the reason for the separation is not any kind of interaction. It's just to be able to clearly monitor which vaccine a side effect might have come from. All right. There's a question of if more than one gets approved, will we need to choose which one we get? When I go for a flu shot, I don't ask who the manufacturer is, I just get a flu shot. So that's a great question as well. And I think the answer right now is that we will probably be sent what is available for use among first responders and healthcare workers as the first phase. And I don't know if Dr. Shepke wants to comment any more on plans from the state as in terms of what that initial rollout might look like, or whether that's still
Sure.
being decided.
Yeah, we were actually speaking a little bit about that today. And obviously, all of these things are fluid and still changing, and we're still waiting for some guidance from the feds on different areas. Keep in mind, though, that other than Johnson & Johnson, and especially the first two that are going to be available, they're going to require a 2-shot series, and you can't mix and match them. So whatever you get a shot number 1, you got to get the same exact manufacturer for shot number 2. Part of the rollout will probably we're going to take into account the logistical difficulties of the particular manufacturer. For example, Pfizer has that little added problem with the negative 80 degrees centigrade, whereas Moderna can be in a regular freezer. So that might impact where things get distributed.
Is it me or is it Dr.
hospital
Shefke?
systems.
There we go.
But I'm sorry, it's the internet connection here sometimes. So I don't know where we're cut out, but the bottom line is we'll probably try to keep things simple, because we can imagine when there's multiple ones that have emergency use authorization, the confusion it can cause if you've got multiple vaccines in your refrigerator or freezer rather, and you have to make sure you get the same shot as that you got the first time. So we'll probably try to pick one for each different area and use it, but these plans are all changing. So
Thanks.
we'll see.
And maybe that's a good point or a good spot to ask David if he can chime in with what the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices just voted on and approved just a few minutes ago. David, are you there? There he is. Go ahead, David. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Now we got you. Go ahead. You got late breaking news for us, right?
I'm not certainly quiet by any stretch of the imagination. So stand by one. I'm going to pull up the one slide I just sent you.
Great background, by the way.
Thank you. So the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which from my understanding, and Dr. Cho or Dr. Shefke can chime in and correct me, supports the CDC with review of any vaccine that gets done. And of course, this one's very high profile, and they're obviously well aware of that. There is a tremendous amount of resources being committed to making sure that this is safe and tracked along the way, and they're encouraging the utilization of vSafe, which is what Dr. Jameson had spoke about. It's an app that gets put on your phone. It's obviously not going to work for everybody, especially an example would be a long-term care facility for the residents that are there, but it certainly will work for individuals who receive it. They're going to interact with you the first week on a regular basis. I believe it's every day, if I remember correctly, and then it slows down from there. But anytime that there's a significant reportable, they call it a signal initially until it's defined as an adverse event, then they interact with you with a human being at that point to collect information of them. They have a timer of anytime that there's a death involved, it's a 1-day investigation. Serious, it's a 3-day investigation. Non-serious, it's a 5-day investigation. So they're committing a absolute ton of resources to ensure that this is safe when it is rolled out. They just voted on it. Was 13-1. And I think the biggest thing about this is that we're watching science before our eyes. And this has been the entire time that COVID has been going on. And it's something that we as a society are not typically used to, and which is the biggest struggle as we've gone along. So that's about it, probably the biggest thing. There's a whole bunch of other and little information, but that's the biggest component.
Thanks, David. And just to confirm, healthcare personnel as defined in this does include emergency medical services, correct?
It does. And actually I was trying to listen at the same time, but one of the 10 comments that was provided is to highlight that firefighters are a component of EMS, and they do fall under that for coverage for the healthcare component.
Very good, thank you. And maybe I'd like to just come back to something that was mentioned a bit in passing before, but I think it's worth reemphasizing again when it comes to side effects and adverse events. When we all saw in the news that there were pauses going on in these trials, some people sort of got uncomfortable with that and felt like that meant that there was a potential problem here, and then maybe felt concerned when they resumed the studies that things might have been, pushed aside for the sake of expediency. I would just say that to me, those pauses that we saw were actually incredibly reassuring, because it means that they're following the normal standard research protocol that we do. I'm involved as an investigator at studies at the hospital, And we have a whole protocol about what is defined as an adverse reaction and what happens when a potential adverse reaction is reported, and how we go through a process to figure out whether that came from our study drug or whether that came from something else unrelated. And so to actually see those pauses occur, was actually quite reassuring to me. I'm not sure if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
I would add that it shows nobody's cutting any safety corners here. And they literally paused an international study in the case of AstraZeneca. In multiple countries, they stopped the study. So I think everybody's taking the safety component very seriously. Whenever you vaccinate, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of people in trials. So the odds that somebody in those trials is going to develop some sort of disease along the way, whether it's vaccine related or not, is really high. And then they'll pause the study to see, was it caused by the vaccine, or does it look safe or not? And I think that's the way these things are rolled out normally. And so, yeah, I agree with you. The fact that they did pause it tells me that they weren't just sweeping it under the rug. They weren't just trying to rush it through. It shows they're doing the normal safety procedures. And so that should be something that's reassuring. And the fact, by the way, that in all of the countries, the folks that looked at it, and it's different sets of experts in each country, and they all said, yeah, we're good to keep proceeding. That's also good that they all came to a unanimous position that they can continue.
Great, thank you. So here's a question that I'm not sure whether Dr. Cho or Dr. Shepke would like to tackle. But the question is, many people compare this vaccine to the flu vaccines. They say, I took a flu shot and I still got the flu this year. We've talked about this, but maybe it's just worth reiterating how different that vaccine is from how these are working.
I'll take a stab at that. Obviously, that's the common myth here with the flu shot. The likelihood of getting flu from the flu vaccine is near impossible. What may occur to some degree, and something that may occur with the COVID vaccine, is that you have an inflammatory response because you are seeing new antigens. But beyond that too, it could be a reaction to some of the lipid, for example, as Dr. Shepke mentioned, with the Pfizer vaccine. But the likelihood, especially with, as Dr. Shepke mentioned in terms of the mechanism that you would get COVID from the COVID vaccines, it's almost near impossible. So I from that standpoint, I believe it would be safe. And I'll stop there.
But I guess the question really is more, why can I get a flu vaccine and still get flu this year? And would there be that same possibility with this coronavirus vaccine?
There's good reason for that. So the influenza mutates rapidly, like you were speaking. We were talking about the mutation stuff. So when they make the vaccine for the flu, it's a best guess of where the mutations are going. The vaccine efficacy rate ends up being anywhere from 20 to 60% and averages about 40% effective. Whereas this particular virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, that it's not multiple strains we're looking at. It hasn't mutated in its receptor binding domain, and it's 94-95% efficacious is what the early data is showing. Now, obviously, like Dr. Cho has pointed out, like you've pointed out, Dr. Jameson, we're still waiting for all that data to be made widely public so we can dissect it and make sure that we're hearing the straight truth. But if that holds true, that is on par with some of the most effective vaccines humans have ever made. And the influenza vaccine, while it's very effective because we vaccinate so many people, it's effective not on the basis of itself, but that it's widely distributed. Because 40% versus 95% are two different ballgames.
I have to echo that as well. That's why I think all of us got us pretty excited when they released the efficacy data. The most effective vaccine that's available right now is probably the measles component of the MMR, which is 97% effective with 2 doses. And at 95%, it's pretty much on par. When you look at even other vaccines beyond the flu, they're at best about 70%. For the pertussis, I think the mumps is about 70%. This is going to be the most effective vaccine if that data still holds with the remainder of that study. So that's what's got us excited about that prospect. But again, we do need to trust but verify and look at that data out there. The other component to this about potentially getting an infection after getting the vaccine is there are still holes, right? Even if it's 95% effective, there's 5% that may still get the infection. You need, and that's where that concept of herd immunity comes into play, where you need enough people to get vaccinated in order to be effective, to make sure that the vulnerable are protected, that enough people are vaccinated in the community to confer that community-wide protection and to close really all those gaps. I think that's a okay way. I don't know if there's a better way to sort of describe that concept of herd immunity, but
yeah, I want to actually take a stab at that because I think that's a super important point. And the difference is when we as individuals look at the effectiveness of the vaccine, we're concerned about whether I get the vaccine, will I still get infected, or could I still get infected? But when we look at them from a community-wide or society-wide or public health standpoint, the effectiveness is a combination of how effective that vaccine is with how many people get it to get to a point of herd immunity where even if the vaccine is not 100%, it will still slow the transmission and decrease your risk of getting that disease. So there's two different ways to look at this. There's the individual way where we all make that decision for ourselves, will we get the vaccine? But there's also a population-based way of looking at this where the effectiveness is not just for me, will the vaccine do it, but if enough people get a vaccine that is effective enough, my risk goes down regardless of whether I get it, and everybody's risk goes down. So there's two different ways that the vaccines work. They work by protecting you individually, but they also work by breaking the chains of transmission in the community and therefore protecting us as a whole. And both of those things go into the overall ability of this vaccine to, one, be accepted by people, and two, to really bring this pandemic to an end. So I think it's important just to make sure that you're looking at it through both lenses. You know, what will this do for me personally, and what will this do for us as a community, a country, or the world? And both of those have significantly different calculations involved in them, but can both be an impactful motivation for somebody to choose to get or to not get the vaccine. One more question just came in about the side effects. I think we've pretty much covered them. I have not seen anything beyond fever, headache, soreness, feeling under the weather for either one of the mRNA vaccines anywhere in the phase 1 or phase 2 published things, or in the phase 3 reported things, even though we haven't seen that data firsthand yet. Have either of you seen anything more severe for either of the mRNA vaccines?
No, I haven't. In fact, that was one of the main things they were pointing out, was there zero severe safety concerns. So, you know, the minor stuff that you're talking about, that's common with lots of vaccines, has to do with the inflammatory and immune system response that we see with lots of vaccines, typically short-lived and better with Tylenol. Most went away in 24 to 48 hours. There were some folks that did last a couple of days beyond that, but the vast majority was 24 to 48 hours. At least that's the data that I've seen.
Dr. Jamison.
Yes.
There's a couple slides that they put on. This was one of them.
Yep, this is from the phase 1 and the phase 2 trials, and you can see that those are the side effects: fever, headache, and sore muscles that they reported, and they're not reporting anything more severe or beyond that. So
this was after.
While those may be fairly common, you know, 30 to 50% in some cases here for the mild stuff, the moderate is fairly rare, and the severe is even less. There was a slide in there, David, about the difference between after the first dose and after the second dose. Oh, it's on this one. There you go.
Yeah, this is second.
So you see there's more of that sort of symptomatic constitutional like stuff after the second dose. But again, this is phase 1 and phase 2 trial data. We don't have the hard data from phase 3, which is something that I certainly want to see as soon as possible. And I've heard that it will be shared at the time the EUA vote is taken or the decision is made by the FDA. So no, I'm not aware of anything more than those side effects. And it sounds like other folks are not as well.
And I think, Dr. James,
Sorry,
I think the thing I'd point out is that they didn't see any dangerous side effects.
correct. Yeah.
The two that the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson, where they stopped they paused rather those studies, is because of potentially dangerous side effects. We didn't see that with the messenger RNAs. You got these, you feel lousy for a little bit, but nothing more severe than that. Which let's hope that holds, and when they finally publish the data for everybody to look at in more detail.
Yeah. So another question is, will the mRNA vaccines encompass any form of passive immunity, for example, mother to fetus? So I'm not sure that we have the data on that. I don't believe we know whether those antibodies and T cells would be able to be transmitted across the placenta or even in breast milk. Do either of you guys have any kind of read on that yet?
I haven't seen any published data on that. I doubt T cells would transmit. Maybe antibodies, because we've seen it with other stuff, but I would just simply be a guess. I haven't seen any data on that.
Yeah, I'm not thinking that that's probably going to be a thing. I think probably pregnant mom would go ahead and get vaccinated, and then child would get vaccinated at some point as well.
Yeah.
David,
Probably be the most likely scenario.
this came up today during that webinar, didn't it?
Did and they emphasized that there was no data currently to know, especially with lactating females as well.
Yeah, I was wondering if and it goes back to looking at the phase 3 data. I don't believe any of the that population would pregnant women would be included in that. So looking at that, and then going back to the side effects piece of it, I think again it goes back to once we have that data from the phase 3 studies, you have to keep in mind for each of the studies, they have 15 to 20,000 people in each of the arms. So we can really get a better quantitative sort of value as to the frequency of those types of side effects. And again, as Dr. Shepke and Dr. Jameson mentioned, no severe side effects, especially with the mRNA. And I think even one of them, Moderna, there was no hospitalization in the vaccine arm. That goes to both the benefit of the vaccine and to some degree illustrating the lack of that severe side effects.
Yeah, I would point out there are other holes in the data, though. We don't know. You mentioned vaccinating children. I don't think there were any children yet. I think Pfizer or Moderna, I don't remember which, is going to start vaccinating down to age 12, but no young children. So there's going to be some significant holes in the data still.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next question is, do we have an anticipated date on when kids or pregnant women would be vaccinated? My read on that is probably sometime late spring-ish. But David, I think they really only talking about group 1A and group 1B today. I believe pregnant women will be in one of the group 2s. Is my memory correct on that? Either you guys know?
I don't remember if they even, I didn't even see it if they did mention it.
So I don't think we're quite there yet on that one. So stand by. Next question is, do you see a combination influenza and COVID-19 vaccine in the future? After all the COVID-19 vaccination is done, I'm not sure, Chief, exactly. Oh, I see. Okay. Do we anticipate the COVID-19 vaccine being an annual shot like the flu shot?
I think Dr. Cho covered this. We don't know. It has not been long enough for us to know how long the immunity will last. So right now, anything I would tell you would just be an educated guess. So sorry, we can't say. Yeah,
what I would say relative to that, though, is that there have been previous efforts to find vaccines against coronaviruses, whether it was for MERS or the original SARS or even the common cold coronavirus. And the fact that we seem to have figured out how to do this now actually gives me some hope that you might be able to get a flu shot and a cold shot at some time in the future and not have to deal with the common colds in the winter. But again, that's just a wishful thinking, maybe. There is an issue with coronaviruses. So coronaviruses are notorious for having waning immunity, meaning you can catch the same one over and over again. You may be immune for a number of months or a year. But when you look at the more severe coronaviruses, because a lot of the human coronaviruses are benign, but you've got SARS, MERS, and now you've got SARS-2.
When you look at the SARS-1, those folks, there weren't a whole lot of them worldwide, not like certainly like this pandemic, but the ones that survived over a decade's worth of T-cell immunity memory cells. That's gives us some hope that we'll get some longer term, but we don't know yet.
Yeah.
One more question that has been asked twice is, in our group of first responders, is there anything that would disqualify us from getting the vaccine?
Underlying health conditions is the question. Anything that would make it dangerous or not recommended to receive the vaccine?
Yeah, respiratory issues, high blood pressure,
condition.
weight, those kind of issues.
General speaking, yeah, it's just generally speaking, people with immunosuppressed conditions should not get any vaccines that have live viruses in them, because while they may be weakened and not be able to cause disease in people with normal immune systems, with weakened immune systems, even a live attenuated virus could cause theoretically a problem. But the messenger RNA vaccines, they're not viruses at all. So I'm not sure. I've not seen any absolute contraindications yet. There's certainly populations where we don't have data, such as young children. And I'm not sure if they've given us enough data on pregnant women yet.
Yeah, I would say, assuming that the phase 3 data, which again encompassed a large group of diverse people who you would assume have a lot of those common underlying comorbidities, assuming that we don't see any signal of danger in that data, I would actually say that folks that are obese or have other underlying conditions probably should be even more eager to get this vaccine, because their risk of a COVID infection is higher than others. So,
absolutely.
I have not seen anything that would say that, all those run-of-the-mill stuff that we think about, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, would be any kind of, or asthma, and would be any kind of contraindication to this. But again, that's why we want to see that phase 3 data with a much larger group. Next is 3 weeks apart and 4 weeks apart for them. Is there any wiggle room on that, or does it have to be exactly to the day?
So the Moderna folks talk about -2 to +5, meaning so they want you to get the second dose on day 28, minus a couple days, or +5 days, I think is how they said it. Hopefully I'm remembering from their webinar correctly. I don't know exactly what it is for the Pfizer. I didn't get to speak to them directly, but they probably have a little bit of wiggle room as well. That doesn't mean wait 6 months, right? We're talking about within the same week or so.
Great, thank you. And then the last one we have so far, so fair warning, if you have any other questions, put them in now, because we're going to wrap up here. We're coming up on an hour. The last one for now is, any concerns for a SARS-CoV-3 around the corner after all of this? Boy, I have a concern for that. I was in public health school doing my master's degree in infectious disease epidemiology when SARS-CoV-1 happened. And this is now, we're on our third severe coronavirus since the year 2000. And unless we have some other significant breakthrough, I would say there's a pretty reasonable probability that we would see another severe one emerge. I hope we will have learned enough from this to contain it and prevent it from being a similar pandemic. Hopefully. I don't have any other questions right now, so please put in your last questions now if you have any. I want to thank both Dr. Cho and Dr. Shepke and Dave Hudak for their time this afternoon. I hope this was helpful to you. I will say that we did put out an internal survey, and a good number of folks would say they would, just right up front say they would be interested in getting the vaccine. But a good chunk of folks also say they're not sure, or they wouldn't necessarily be interested in getting a vaccine. So that's why we wanted to start this conversation, give you the background, the basic science, the understanding of how we arrived where we are. I think you should know that it will be within likely a matter of just a few weeks before vaccines are ready to be offered and From a logistics standpoint, planning is already well underway for that, to the point where I think within a few days of an EUA, we will be launching a vaccination program to offer the vaccine to all of our folks. There was a question about whether getting the vaccine would mean you don't have to wear PPE anymore, which I forgot to answer. And no, not right away, but it would certainly move us back towards normal. And it might allow us to scale down the PPE a little bit once you're vaccinated as well. I know for me in the hospital, I still wear an N95 on every patient, and I might back that off to maybe a surgical mask after I'm vaccinated. I guess I would just conclude by saying a few weeks ago when we first started seeing the efficacy data from the phase 3 trials was maybe the first time I've smiled about anything related to coronavirus in quite a few months. And so I do believe this is some light at the end of the tunnel. I've committed to share my analysis and my decision-making on whether or not I will accept the vaccine with you all as we go through. Right now, I'm inclined to receive it, but that is pending seeing the phase 3 data. So we will do another one of these as needed, and particularly when that phase 3 data comes out. And we will keep you up to date as best we can. If there are any questions in the meantime or concerns, please don't hesitate to email me, and I will try and get the answer from somebody who knows much better than me, like Dr. Shepke or Dr. Cho. Again, thanks for paying attention. I hope this was useful, and thank you to Dr. Shepke and Dr. Cho for joining us.
And much thanks from the field. They're all very thankful, and they're all in the comments saying thank you. I think you answered a lot of their questions before they even got a chance to ask them. So this was very good for our undecided group, I'm sure.
Great. And Jasmine, this is recorded and it will be posted on the EMS training website or YouTube channel, correct?
Yes, it will. And also we will, as we get more resources, we will provide, there will be a folder for the group that would like more information on this on Target Solutions. So you can watch this and our last vaccination live stream, and we will publish the studies as they come out as well.
Correct. We will actually put the data there for you all to see in the folder in Target Solution so that you can have that information to make your decisions for yourselves. And yes, Chief Zepeto, the post-test begins now.
If you would like another test, I can give you one. You got one this morning.
All right. Thank you again. And everybody, please keep it up. I think we're rounding a corner. I know it's tiring, but please keep doing the right thing here. And let's try and make it to the end of this thing.
Thank you.
Stay safe out there.
Stay safe. Until next time, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.